Warning! This show contains adult themes and language, including Jesus Burrito.
Dysevidentia is an inability to reliably process evidence, and this is a podcast all about it.
This episode was released on April 18th, 2022, and we are discussing Dysevidentia because it is clear millions of Shroudies are suffering from it. I am Mako.
And I am Squeaky.
We discuss logic and evidence because we lack any religious iconography of our own.
You can support us by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Dysevidentia.
If you spent all your money on Jesus Toast, you can like, subscribe, and leave a review to help us out.
If you have a paper you have written or a small business to plug, let us know.
Today we are going to discuss ongoing developments of the Ukrainian war and the Shroud of Turin.
I'm going to take that okay and use it out of context.
No.
I'm going to take that and use it out of context. I'm going to have, some horrible white supremacist saying stuff, and you're going to say okay. Then he's going to say that, he's not going to kick puppies, and you're going to say no.
That's fucked up.
I don't know how to take that out of context.
You puppy kicker.
No! Other than burst pipes, we're on a roll.
Okay.
We don't have any corrections from last time again, and all the various communities and groups that listen to us have been growing. So fewer people have contacted us for corrections, but we had 0 last time.
Oh, so we have 0 this time, so it's not actually fewer?
We're just dividing by 0 differently?
Okay. I don't know if that's allowed.
Way to continue the joke. You killed it. We're trying to ad-lib some jokes, and you're like, no, you killed the joke. Anyway, I'm sure we got some things wrong. If we did, contact us, let us know. If we issue a correction, we give you a flash drive. Just one of those same ones we're giving away in our raffle, which is coming to a close here any minute for us. But you'll be hearing this in a week, and we probably will have announced winners by then, by the time you hear this.
Yeah, I mean, not here, but on our Twitter or something. Twitter, right?
Yeah, we'll probably announce in all the places.
Okay.
One big part of the raffle, and this was inspired by a community member, you know who you are, was a few episodes ago we claimed that the average American thinks that Jesus was white. We didn't have any evidence for that, and we realized we might be talking out our butt. We still might owe this person a flash drive even. We'll probably send them one anyway, even if they're right. Even if we're right, we'll probably still send them one. But we made a poll question to ask, do you think Jesus was real? If so, what race was he?
Seems like a straightforward question.
I had to invalidate some non-race, non-no answers. And I'm being pretty liberal with race, right? Someone said, yes, Klingon. I did not invalidate that.
That is technically a race. A fictitious one, but a race nonetheless.
Talking about Jesus, fiction clearly is on the table.
Wow. But yeah.
So some answers I invalidated. Yes, to die for us. Is there some group of people out there called to die for us that I'm unaware of?
No.
What about just uppercase A?
Did they, okay, I feel like if it's just uppercase A, maybe they had their fingers offset, one key, and they went to I don't know, maybe do an apostrophe and they hit enter instead, and then they're like, God damn it.
They're like a pirate. They're like, "Arr!" right at the beginning. They're Canadian typing backwards.
I don't know, but I feel like something along those lines had to have happened with that A. I don't know.
And it's possible, but it would just move him down to the next question.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe they remapped the enter key to be the submit.
Somebody else just put in an uppercase I.
That one, I don't.
Other invalidated answers were yes, don't care, interesting question. If you don't have an answer, you don't have an answer. Put one in, or even I don't know. I didn't invalidate any I don't know, or a lot of people had various forms of things that sounded correctish.
Yeah.
Like people who said, yes, I don't know. I disagree with your yes, but I didn't ask you to agree with me. I asked what you thought. And if you say, I don't know, that's legit. I can't fault you for that, right?
Yeah, people know what they know.
So a lot of the correctish ones are yes, Middle Eastern, yes, Jewish, Syrian, Arabic. And some people got really detailed, yes, not sure what races were distinguished back in the day. No idea. I'll go with whatever the historians conclude. That's entirely valid and way more characters than I thought the poll would let you put in.
Yeah.
No?
That's looks like, at least the ones you wrote down. Well, no, okay, there's one more I can see that's longer than it.
Oh, yeah. Yes, he's the Monaco Grand Prix because the race completely changed my life for the better. Good stuff.
Yeah, that, I guess, is a definition of race.
I didn't even discount this guy. Yes, some sort of OP alien. Whoa, that is some conspiracy theory level nonsense and hilarious. Yes, probably the 100-meter sprint.
I mean,
I don't know,
as
took him-
much walking as Jesus allegedly did back in the day, probably was a kind of athletic.
Probably a relay then? Some
Yeah.
sort of marathon?
Maybe.
Somebody put an orc getting some fantasy races. And gnome. Ooh, might just be anti-Semitic and terrible.
Maybe, but
We-
I don't know. There's some deniability there.
I read them all. We didn't get any elf or dwarf.
Okay. What about Goblin?
No goblins, no kobolds.
Okay.
We won't be able to fill out the Fellowship of the Ring with just these. We need at least a few halflings.
Mm-hmm.
We got some that were very wrong. We had at least 2 people that said Muslim, and one person who said Muslim didn't know where the caps lock key was. They just were like screaming.
Well, they were just trying to be cool, so they just turned on cruise control.
Caps lock is indeed cruise control for cool. But I mean, how can somebody be Muslim 700 years before the concept of being Muslim existed? At least the people who were saying like Israeli or Israelite or Canaanite or Arabic were like, sure, there isn't a country Israel, but at least there was a tribe of Israel. Like did they call themselves Israelites?
No idea.
Yeah, but at least that's vaguely plausible.
Yeah.
And then some other categories of wrong, and I didn't discount this, right? I
Yeah.
asked for people's opinions. And
This category are the ones that bother me. The rest of these are like, but like, ugh.
So here's another quote. Of course he was real. There's lots of written and archaeological proof, and obviously he was Jewish.
Just as matter-of-factly stating things that are not matter-of-fact.
Well, the whole archaeological evidence thing. As far as I'm aware, there's none.
Yeah.
We have what's in the Gospels, and then 2 documentary sources, and no artifacts from, like, his life. And that would be the archaeological evidence, unless we're saying the 2 documents are the archaeological evidence. But even then, there's not lots. There's 2 extra biblical paragraphs. Two. I'll go ahead and cite Josephus and Tacitus. And I guess I have to go dig up links now, don't I?
Yeah, now you do. Yes.
Fine, I will put that. Give me a second. Okay. Another one that was in this very wrong category. There's plenty of scientific proof that Jesus did indeed exist at some point, and yes, he was white. It's simply the fact that no one can confirm if he actually had powers is what most people don't agree on over.
So clearly this person has only ever discussed this within religious circles.
Yeah, and probably American Western religious circles.
Yeah, almost certainly.
Because overwhelmingly, people didn't say he was white, but we had huge international reach. I saw a guy from Nepal saying that he was definitely white, which was weird. A lot of people from Africa saying he was black. A lot of people from Europe saying he was Jewish. It's something contradictory. At least one person said he was Jewish, so he couldn't be white. And at least one person said he was Jewish, so he couldn't be white.
There had to be white?
All right.
They're saying either way. Like, he's Jewish, therefore no white, and he was Jewish, therefore definitely white.
Yeah, sorry if I said that wrong. That's exactly what I meant, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just some people declare Jewish as white, some people say it's not. And, like, that shows how loose this conception of race is.
Yeah.
Meh.
I don't know.
Correct
maybe.
me, get a flash drive.
Okay.
Ways to correct me. You can reach out on Patreon, patreon.com/Dysevidentia.
We have a subreddit, r/Dysevidentia.
You can tweet at us at Dysevidentia.
We have a Discord and a YouTube channel. Links to both are in the show notes.
You can email us, contact@Dysevidentia.com.
But we do not have a Facebook because fuck Mark Zuckerberg.
Pretty soon we can fuck Meta Zuckerberg. We can pay to fuck him with Zuckbucks.
We technically could. And as much as we constantly say fuck Mark Zuckerberg, don't actually fuck Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, don't fuck robots. That's a great way to just hurt your dick.
Also, he doesn't deserve it. But, whatever.
So I guess before we move on to the main topic with the Shroud of Turin, because we actually discussed Jesus a lot already, just discussing our poll, I've been hearing a lot of interesting misinformation about the war in Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, misinformation during wars is kind of a given. There's always been some degree of propaganda during the course of a war. But we also have the benefit of social media and the internet to spread really cheaply produced misinformation.
So I'm going to lump all the stuff I've heard sort of into 2 broad categories.
Mm-hmm.
Obvious bullshit from Russia.
Okay.
And ignorant bullshit from right-wing zealots.
Okay.
So, like, obvious bullshit from Russia. Claims that they aren't doing war crimes. Claims that they're not shooting civilians. Claims
like the crisis actors.
Oh, God. Yeah. So I started aggregating sources on April 4th for this thing. And that day, it wasn't super obvious to me that there were huge amounts of atrocities. I mean, we've discussed, killing of civilians and raping of innocent people.
Yeah.
Rape. It shouldn't happen. But there was no evidence that it was endorsed on, like, a large level by the Russian army. Well, when they pulled out Abuka and there were 400 people they've confirmed now that were dead, even that day it was kind of unsure. Do we take this one Ukrainian source? It was like the deputy mayor or the mayor saying it. But now I've got all the different news sources. I've got Al Jazeera, NBC Washington. One of the first sources was a blog, Bellingcat. And the BBC has satellite images. We have mass graves. We've confirmed it left, right, and center. And even when Russia put out a story saying, no, those were crisis actors, somebody put out satellite footage from 3 days before saying, yeah, here's the 6 corpses that were on the ground 3 days before that Ukrainian convoy came through.
So clearly, these crisis actors have some dedication.
Dedication? Oh my God. Wait.
I was not trying to go for a pun there. What the fuck?
Well, you fucking got one.
Okay.
That's some overtime. Fuck. So yeah, there's the obvious bullshit from Russia. But the right-wing trolls are slightly more subtle than that, because the Russian propaganda is targeted at the Russian people, trying to make them not feel terrible about killing lots of innocent people.
Yep.
And because Russia controls the information inside Russia, they can do that more easily than lie to Western faces. So the Russian trolls' lies kind of fall into, let's explain away what Russia's doing. And try to make Russia seem better because for some reason the right-wing people are aligned with Trump and Putin for reasons I don't understand it fully. But some right-wing trolls are saying things like, Russia is not losing the war, they're pulling out of Kiev because it was just a feint.
Yeah, you don't mobilize that many resources for a feint.
And even if you were going to, it doesn't make sense. All of the stated goals of Russia, or even if you want to put hypothetical goals onto them, right? They were trying to denazify, they were trying to, if it was a feint to distract troops or resources from the Donbass region, or whatever, any goal is furthered by taking the enemy leadership. There is no war you can prosecute against Ukraine that isn't made more effective by successfully taking Kyiv.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's as a feint, it's dumb, because most of the defenders of Kyiv were locally grown militia groups and defenders who were there. They weren't it's not the kinds of groups you can move across the country. Imagine if Michigan had a militia to defend Michigan against Canadian invasion, and you have to move them all the way across the country to Texas, right, to defend against Mexico invading. That's similarly difficult, and a similar distance. It's ridiculous. And the other right-wing lies line up just about like that. I don't know. I've got some good sources for that. I found one gamer turned analyst who is just applying basic logic and using Oryx and other open source intelligence sources. And he makes a lot of good logical points. He's not shilling for either side. His name is Peyron. How do you pronounce that? Right here.
Peyron?
Yeah, Peyron.
That's my guess.
Yeah. For the other stuff, we're citing the New York Post, ABC News, Human Rights Watch, the BBC for the satellite images, NBC Washington for mass graves, Al Jazeera for the intercepts. No, wait, I'm sorry. Where's the one where the things were intercepted? I already mentioned.
Right above Peyron, right here.
There it is. Yeah. And we're citing the New York Post for intercepted messages where somebody in some level of Russian leadership is telling people to kill civilians. So now it's undeniable, unless all the sources that have reported this are all being fooled. It's way too plausible that there's specific targeting of civilians to discount that at this point.
The scale at which we are seeing civilian deaths suggests that there has to be some amount of leadership endorsement.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. How about we move on from murder onto just tricking people out of their money?
Okay.
I mean, I presume that's why the Shroud was invented?
Maybe.
I mean, it's not like Turin is exactly a hopping tourist hub.
I don't know. It could be that, yeah, some dude wanted to just set up a display and charge admission, or maybe he was just trying to impress a girl. I don't fucking know.
The reasons people throughout history fuck up to impress a girl.
It happens all the time, dude. All the goddamn time.
I am not disagreeing one bit. I have done my fair share of stupid for such reasons.
We all have. We all have.
What?
I started reading the sponsor sketch just to refresh, and I read, "What are you doing?" and my brain immediately inserted Step Shroud.
What are you doing, Step Shroud? Ooh.
Why am I like this?
You were saying that it's plausible that the Shroud of Turin was just a tourist trap?
Yeah, we don't know. There's a lot of things about the Shroud of Turin we don't know. We don't know, what prior to, I think, 1389, what exactly was going on with the Shroud of Turin. We don't know why it surfaced where it did. We don't know what we just don't know about its genesis, for lack of a better term. We don't know.
One of my favorite things is that in the timelines for important events of the Shroud of Turin, the first thing that came up was 13th to 14th century, Shroud of Turin discovered. 1390, a Catholic bishop calls the shroud fake. What?
Yeah.
It's like, if they thought it was fake way back then, what are the real chances for verifiable quality artifact here?
Yeah. Well, let's rein in the they. It was a singular bishop. But yes, the singular bishop that went to see the Shroud of Turin immediately concluded that it was a fake.
Okay, I'm going to have to add that CNN source, the CNN travel one, because that timeline is too perfect. It's not a great source because it uncritically accepts so much of the nonsense, but that timeline is so good.
Okay. But for those that don't know, we really should probably establish what the Shroud of Turin is.
That's fair.
Yeah. So if those of you that are familiar with the story of crucifixion for Jesus Christ, Jesus was crucified, and to prove that he was dead, he was pierced by a lance, and then they buried him first by wrapping him in a linen cloth and placing him, I believe, in a cave, right?
It's my understanding there was a cave involved at some point, yeah?
Yeah. So the Shroud of Turin is that linen cloth that Jesus was buried in, allegedly. And yeah, that's it. Where exactly it was from the time that it was removed from Jesus's body to roughly 1390 when it appears in written record, we don't really know. People have made a few claims about where exactly it was and what it was, but yeah, all of that is speculation and unknown.
To provide some more context for this, this is a shroud that measures, so it's 1 cubit by 4 cubits. For those of us who don't like those really old, outdated measurement systems, that makes it just about 1 meter wide and 4¼ meters, so 4 meters, 25 centimeters long. If you'd like your units slightly outdated, it's 3 feet 7 inches wide and 14 feet long. So it's a big, long rectangle of cloth that was a standardized size for Jewish culture at the time. And how you use one of these cloths is you'd put a dead person on one half of the cloth, and the other half you'd fold over their head, and you'd tuck the rest under their feet, and then you'd cross their arms on them, you'd cross their legs, and you'd wrap the remaining bits on the edges over them, and it would create a suitable body bag. And then you'd use a linen strip about a hand width. This part wasn't nearly as standardized, 4 inches maybe, I don't know, was it 10 centimeters, something like that, wide, and the same length. So you could just tear a bit of your shroud off, and you'd tie it around their feet and wrap it around their body in a spiral, tying it off on their neck, giving you a nice body bag and handle for carrying your Messiah away.
A handle, even.
Yep.
Convenient.
And a lot of the problems with this stem from blood, forensic evidence, things that come from it carrying a body or not carrying a body. So, want to jump into typical bullshit that shroud believers try to put forward?
Sure. What are you doing in my bedroom with bloody rags?
I'm checking to see if this computer's Jesus. Someone in our poll said he might be an alien, so I figured this Alienware computer might be holy or something.
Look, I don't buy Alienware shit. I get my computers from ABK Kustoms.
Oh, so I wrapped it in this bloody shroud for no reason?
Well, at least you didn't break it this time. Although this blood seems alarmingly fresh.
Hang on.
What are these nails in the computer?
I crucified your PC.
Why are you like this? Why do you insist on destroying my computers?
I didn't. Look, it still runs.
What? How?
I avoided the electronics because I wanted to hang it outside for 3 days running Prime 95 and other intense benchmarks to see if it still worked.
Well, the experts at ABK Kustoms know how to build a computer, so it would have.
So your computer is the digital Omni Messiah?
The fuck are you on about? Never mind. If you want one of those, whatever they are, go to ABK Kustoms to speak to an expert and get a custom PC and save 10% with code EVIDENCE.
ABKKUSTOMZ.com. I watched a bunch of short little YouTube videos and I tried to find stuff about this in our conspiracy, but it's not big there. I picked one video as a prototypal example of the bullshit surrounding the Shroud. A common thing that almost all of these sources had was that they don't link to sources, and when they do cite things, and it's not like a good citation, they just say, scientists claim, or somebody at Oxford said, and it's citations in that vein, then you have to go do the legwork to go find what the hell they're talking about.
Like, I could walk over, well, maybe not walk, but I could go to Oxford, stand there, make a claim, and I'm technically somebody at Oxford claiming.
Because you'd be the one saying it, you'd be more credible than everyone in these videos.
Yeah, but still.
Yeah.
Just me being geographically at Oxford doesn't qualify me to make statements, and technically that phrasing means anyone geographically at Oxford.
Yup. It's some bullshit. This one video was released in 2019, and that's not special. These videos come out all the time. There's always some person who's just suffering Dysevidentia really hard who makes another one of these videos probably once or twice a day. But check them for trivially checkable erroneous claims if you have to deal with them for some reason. Like this one claimed that the shroud was available and on display. All you had to do was go to the church and look. It's been off public display since 2015.
2018, according to a source that I read.
Okay, but another source I saw said that it was taken off public display in 2015 and was shown once again in 2018 to a limited selection.
Yeah, it was like 1 week.
Yeah, okay.
Most showings are much longer than a week, but the 2018 was about 1 week.
Don't they call them like ostentatias or something, and people get to look at them for a while?
Something like that.
Yeah, it's not on public display, and for the past 20 or so years, it really hasn't been. They put it on show for a while and then hide it away again.
Yeah, it's at pretty much Pope discretion. They will put it out, then take it away, put it out, take it away, whatever.
Continuing this theme of trivially checkable bullshit, this person claimed that there was no mention of the shroud in scripture or in other places, and that the appearance of the shroud not being in these places made it more credible. Because why would you fake something that wasn't in the source documents?
Okay, that's a little backwards, but I guess, kinda. Well, they're saying that nobody has a stake in it, so therefore, what's the motivation? That's not great logic, but it's something, kinda.
It's also just wrong.
Yeah, figures.
John 20-7, whatever. I'll link to it. I'll give you a Bible Hub link. They talk about the shroud and it being discarded and left behind in the cave.
Huh.
So it's mentioned, and other people write about it. It's just bullshit. They also they claim that the scientific community comes to some consensus that the shroud is real, but they link to no papers, they link to no studies, they don't even link to a scientist. So
yeah, we'll be covering it a little bit later, but I did read the few comments from actual scientists, and all the ones that came close to trying to claim that it is real are dubious, and all the rest are at best saying inconclusive. So that's just not correct.
Yeah. And this is what most of this is like. They're baseless claims, they're appeals to emotion, or they're saying things that are trivially debunkable. But then there's a category... before we get onto the category of more plausible videos, more plausible nonsense. These people will often make pseudo-scientific claims, and they will say things that forging is impossible because of some special property of the shroud. Well, if you have to deal with this, ask for a source on what about this shroud is impossible to forge, because people will say it's impossible to forge, and then not say anything about the composition of the shroud. Because... some people will say there's UV light was needed to make the shroud. Some people are saying that it couldn't have been painted. It couldn't have been a ton of different things. And none of them are really based in reality. There's nothing that special about this, and we'll get into that, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But there's probably a dozen different ways to fake this. It just, some of them take time, like letting it sit around for a good long time before it becomes difficult to get to that state. If a thing has to rot in a basement for 20 years before it looks plausible.
No, it's at a few hundred years, so good there.
Yeah. So the other category of, this specific video claimed that all forging was impossible. They presented no evidence, but they did throw a bunch of technobabble at it. And they claimed that it needed high-energy radiation bombarding, but again, cited no sources. Well, if anybody's making claims like this, we need to demand sources.
Yeah, what kind of high energy? Even when you're just saying high energy, do you mean a lot of heat? Do you mean a lot of light? Do you mean a lot of sound? Do you need to shout at it really, 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 really hard?
Hurt its feelings.
What energy? And how high? And what process are you expecting to see happen when you apply this high energy? Get details.
Yep. And then when you can start getting details, you get into the other category of claims around the shroud. Things that are proper pseudoscience instead of the trappings of pseudoscience. I've got a link to a BBC documentary that just asks questions about the validity of the shroud. And I was annoying Mako with it, listening to it while he was here. We were, just about to start recording as I got the last 5 or 10 minutes of it done. But it's not great. I went through and vetted some of the sources they are claiming, and they're not great sources. They're not following anything resembling the scientific method, but they have a lot of the trappings of science. They take pieces of fabric and stick them under microscopes. But are they testing or experimenting, or what are they doing?
Can confirm microscopes are scientific.
Yeah, that's about what they're doing. This feels like science. Look, a tool. Believe us.
It's a science tool used by scientists. They have science in their name.
So the number one hard thing to overcome here is that the shroud has been carbon dated. And religious people love to throw mud on carbon dating, but scientists keep going back to it because it works and is reliable.
Yeah.
When organisms take in carbon, they take in carbon-14 for reasons, for biological reasons that are like good chemistry reasons.
Well, the isotope is created from solar radiation, but we can get into that later.
Yeah, and this decays at a known rate and lets us estimate how long it was until a thing stopped living. And since we make linen out of cotton, and cotton is a plant that takes in solar radiation and carbon, that lets us really confidently date these things. So in my own personal experience, I've had young Earth creationists try to tell me that carbon dating doesn't work because how do you know the thing wasn't in a pool of water? And I'm like, dude, it's carbon. It doesn't care if it's in water. It's carbon. It doesn't care if you burn it, if you do all these things to it. The only thing that changes it is time and, well, like you said, solar radiation forms it. But
yeah, well, the way I heard it described when I was doing my research is it's carbon dating works when something, like you're trying to measure when the organism or the object, most of the time it's organic, but technically doesn't have to be, but when it stops exchanging carbon with its environment. Like you and I, we are living, we are breathing, we are exchanging all sorts of things, carbon included, with our environment, even now as we record this podcast.
Yeah, every time I breathe, I give off carbon, and every time I eat a Chipotle burrito, I take in carbon.
Yeah, so when that stops, presumably because of death, then, okay, yeah, you could be in submerged in water, but I guess maybe some carbon from the water would get onto your skin, but that's not going to get everywhere throughout your body like you being alive does.
Yeah, when cotton is formed, an organic process happens, a chemical process happens that locks carbon into fibers. It's like soaking it in water, unless it dissolves it, isn't going to significantly exchange that. It's not, like you're talking about, a process that exchanges carbon with the environment. It's not gonna change.
Yeah.
And that's why you can do things like take a piece of wood that's super old, possibly, thousands of years ancient, and ask, when did this come from? And get a good answer with carbon dating. And I even learned something during this. When we were first discussing the episode, you were like, carbon dating did this. And I'm like, I don't think carbon dating can do anything younger than a few thousand years. And I've been wrong about that for the past 20 years.
Yeah.
It totally can.
I actually made a point to put in the radiocarbon dating thing specifically because of your comment.
Yeah, so I'd been duped by a young Earth creationist about 25 years ago into believing that nonsense. I still proved him wrong using the rest of science, but damn.
Yeah, and I suppose, since we're talking about it already, I can go over some of that. But carbon-14 is the specific isotope being tested. And one of the Reddit comments when I was trying to get a better understanding of radiocarbon dating made a point that isotope dating is something that is used in all manners of different isotopes. In fact, the similar technique to this, but not with carbon-14, with an isotope of uranium, was used to estimate the age of the Earth. But it's the same basic idea. You're measuring decay rate of a particular isotope.
As long as you know what one unstable, and there's a specific definition for unstable for nuclear science, as long as you're measuring one unstable thing and you know what it decays into.
The half-life.
Yeah. The half-life tells you how long it takes to decay, and if you know what it decays into, you can measure those two ratios and estimate when that thing stopped exchanging that material with its environment.
So the half-life for carbon-14 is 5,730 years, and in most cases... Sorry?
So if a thing has half of the carbon-14 you expect, it's about that old. Yeah.
Roughly.
And you just do the math going forward or backwards. Okay.
Radiocarbon dating, in most cases, can reliably, plus or minus about 80 years, measure something up to 50,000 years old. But there are different techniques. Like you can have a larger sample or you can have a larger exposure time, for example, to try to get more precise measurements and push that out a little bit further. In some cases, we've had things dated that were 80,000 years old on the upper end doing these things.
That lines up with my understanding otherwise.
Yeah.
I guess back to the BBC documentary real quick.
Yep.
Because we just started off with, they keep lampshading carbon dating. Because they opened up with, this has been carbon dated. This is settled by scientists, right? And yeah, it pretty much is. Everyone who's taken a look at this and is credible and doesn't have, like, problems agrees. This thing was made sometime in the 13th or 14th century, and that's that. But they went and found some experts who were sympathetic. Like, they got one cloth expert, and she was apparently some sort of historian of textiles, and they were talking about the way this thing was woven. It has what's called a herringbone weave. A herringbone is a zigzag pattern, but lined up so it's like straight instead of at an angle. I should make a correction here, because I'm a fucking pleb when it comes to weaving. I took this person's word for it and didn't correctly double check at the time of recording that this was indeed a herringbone weave. It's actually just some random sloppy weave made on a loom that I'll put a source in. They say it's similar to a 3-in-1 chevron weave. That's both a little bit more complex and suffers all the same problems as the herringbone weave in that it wasn't used at the time, and the machines used at the time of Christ to make fabric wouldn't lead to the kinds of errors that we see in the fabric. I'll link a source, medievalshroud.com. The rest of my points here still stand in that this fabric probably wasn't made at the time of Christ, but was easy to make at the time in medieval Europe when the shroud appeared. So, a fancy weave pattern that they didn't have in Roman times. So, it can't be from Roman time. I guess somebody could have invented it just for Jesus. That's possible.
That's a remarkably specific claim.
Yeah, and that's just not something people normally talk about. And this historian didn't point that out. So clearly this person was deeply sympathetic to this. They didn't even provide an explanation for this issue. They just washed over it, which tells you that they're really biased here. They wanted to prove a certain point. And to buy themselves credibility, this documentary did things like listed all the ways a forger could have forged this. And of course, they didn't list all the ways. They listed a few ways, and they ruled them out. Like, this couldn't have been painted because reasons. And they had some reasons that were kind of bad, and all boiled down to, none of this looks like paint, ignoring that you could bust out a paintbrush and paint blood on there. Because the substance on the shroud, by everyone's measure, appears to be real blood. They also said that an embalmer couldn't have faked this, because there's no way an embalmer would have known to crucify people through the ankles and wrists as the shroud appears to be. Ignoring that if this was faked, it would be done in Turin, a place in Italy, sort of an important part of the Roman Empire. And it's entirely possible that that knowledge survived, the 700 or 800 years from the fall of the Roman Empire in that area to then. Maybe it was more. Maybe the Roman Empire fell later, but they were still, like, the Byzantines were still around in the East. That's like, when the Roman Empire fell, all their stuff didn't disappear. Somebody carried this knowledge on. It's not implausible that an embalmer got in touch with a priest and figured out what the most plausible crucifixion method would be. Another thing they said it couldn't be was a bas relief, which is a specific kind of painting that involves some sort of transfer from one cloth to another, and they tried to rule this out with some other pseudoscience stuff. I don't want to get into all of it, because they listed a few more, but what they didn't do is categorically rule out that it wasn't a fake by using the evidence available, doing something like proving what time it was from. They just tried to keep getting people to throw mud on it, and even then, they didn't do it effectively. Sure, it couldn't have been some of these very tiny categories of things, but one thing they didn't rule out was just taking a corpse, crucifying it, wrapping it in a shroud, and stuffing that shroud in a basement for a couple years to give it some aged appearance.
Yeah, if everything about the shroud allegedly is accurate, except the person that was put there and when they were put there, those are two really important details for everyone who believes the shroud is genuine.
Yeah, and for people making those claims about needing high energy and stuff, that's ridiculous. The big problem with why the shroud is faded is it's super old.
Yeah.
That's it.
Shit fades.
Yeah, shit fades. And to go further down this buying credibility rabbit hole, they tried to cross-reference it with a bunch of art from earlier. Like, they had some Byzantine art from, like, the 700s or 800s. And they're like, look, you can see how in this Jesus had folded hands a certain way, and you can see the shape of the shroud. You can see how they laid out the corpse in the shroud. Well, ignoring that this was culturally common things to do for a corpse that had been crucified, or for just a Jewish corpse in general. They ignored that if this painting was around before the shroud, the painting might have been used as a reference to create a fake shroud. Everyone was saying that this shroud must have been made before the painting, because otherwise how could the painter have painted it?
Yeah, that's...
So they found a lot... Yeah, they found a lot of coincidences, but they never established cause and effect. They could have just had that flipped around entirely. And they didn't bother to mention that or point out the possible inconsistencies there because they were trying to buy credibility, not seek truth. If you seek truth, you need to be comfortable with occasional and intermittent doubt because that happens sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes things are difficult to get at.
They also clipped some scientists out of context, but not in the really crappy American way where we'll clip a scientist out of context where he says, where if the scientist has a, full 5-minute long spiel, we might just clip the part where he says, yeah, the Shroud of Turin might be real. And that would be what the Americans put in their documentaries. No, we got a whole 2 or 3 sentences from this scientist where he said, I'm siding with the preponderance of the evidence that right now the shroud does not appear to be real. There is carbon dating, but I could have my mind changed if there is sufficient evidence. I don't feel I'm always going to believe that the shroud is real. And he went on to say how he was open-minded to change, trying to imply in that ever so subtle British way that I see the BBC do a lot that things might be changing this way, trying to buy more credibility claiming that, and it just doesn't comport with the evidence. I don't know. Is that too much?
No, that's fine.
No, okay.
Right.
And finally, the last thing they did was when they did try to claim to run a test, they didn't run a test. They made a big dramatic showing of. They even asked, are you willing to test your shroud and see if it works in the environment it was designed for? And they went and put a corpse in a cave. I mean, it was a styrofoam corpse. We all knew that, but they just put it in the cave, and they acted like this was some big test.
What is that supposed to prove?
Fucking nothing. It was supposed to get you to think that they're proving a thing and then fill up 5 more minutes of the documentary.
Oh, okay then.
It was just nonsense. It literally was nothing. It just angered me, so I just wanted to just yell at them for this.
Yeah.
Blah.
They proved what would happen if you put a styrofoam body wrapped in linen in a cave.
So to wrap up that chunk of what I just went over, there's sort of two categories of this BS. There's the totally unsubstantiated nonsense, which is what most people, in my experience, put forward in day-to-day conversations about the Shroud. And then there's the pseudoscience with the air of legitimacy. These people look like they were trying to do work, they had tools, they had apparatus, it looked like they cared. But if you dig into any of their claims, even the littlest bit, they fall apart.
Yep.
Okay, what do you got? Something about the history? Is it true that Jesus was all about gold and wealth?
Of course not. Haven't you ever seen important documentaries like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade?
No, I'm just trying to write a joke to tie Clock and Chain's new gold jewelry for Autism Acceptance Month into this episode.
Don't they make custom chainmail?
Yeah, and this month they have some new gold pieces to inspire awe and celebrate neurodiversity and autism acceptance.
Where do I find this? Asking for a friend.
clockandchain.squarespace.com and use code EVIDENCE for free shipping in the US, even to a friend. The history of the Shroud.
The history of the Shroud. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of nitty-gritty about the history of the Shroud because I don't have time for that, to be honest. But just a brief rundown. So we don't know what was going on with the Shroud prior to the 13th century. We just don't. We know it has a written record that begins in 1390 AD with the bishop that we mentioned earlier.
So literally the first piece of documentation we have on it is that it's fake.
Yes. Yes. The very first thing that acknowledges its existence claims it's fake.
Tell me you're religious without saying you're religious.
Anyway, so I'm probably going to butcher this name, but it was originally in possession of Geoffroy de Charny in Liray, France. I probably fucked those up.
What year?
1390 AD.
Oh, he's probably dead.
Well,
and even if he isn't, he probably doesn't listen to the podcast. You're fine.
I would still like to get pronunciations correct, but whatever. I'm just not... You're right. I shouldn't apologize specifically to that person, but I mean, there's probably somebody out there with that name that's like, hey, you fucked up. And that's valid.
Okay.
Anyway, so after that, some time went by, as time tends to. Margaret de Charny deeded the shroud to the House of Savoy in 1453. The House of Savoy held it and eventually took the shroud to the Turin Cathedral in 1578, and that is where it currently is. The House of Savoy retained ownership despite passing it along to the Turin Cathedral until 1983. Then it was given to the Holy See, which, as I understand, and I could be wrong about this, is pretty much a synonym for the Vatican.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's like, there's a subtle distinction, but it's like a corporation or some nonsense that represents the Vatican. But yeah, it's something like that.
Yeah. So that's kind of the geographic history of the Shroud of Turin. There's been a couple incidents where it was damaged in fires. There was even one point in time, I believe, where mercury was accidentally dropped on it.
Oh, like you do.
Yeah, shit happens. But yeah, those are things like that have also happened in the Shroud's history. But the Shroud's history is not too much more than passing the ownership, moving around geographically, and the occasional damage it suffered from mishaps.
Okay, so largely it's been in private collections or been just held by the Vatican and not much analysis or discovery has gone into it. I presume this changed recently with more scientific techniques and better options?
A bit, yeah. So I don't know exactly what prompted the Vatican to want to publicly do tests the way they did initially, but if I was to speculate, it would probably just be because of all the scientific methods that were being developed at the time. They probably figured, hey, yeah, we can verify its authenticity, so go for it. The very first direct study, and I say direct because it involves direct contact and sampling of the shroud itself. There have been other scientific analysis even before this, but those were people taking photographs of the Shroud of Turin and then scientists analyzing the photograph, not hands-on analysis of the item itself. So the first direct study of the shroud was conducted in 1978 by a large team of scientists to study the authenticity of the shroud.
Wait. So this thing's been around for like 700 years? Sorry, 1978, that's 13. It's 600 years before an analysis?
From scientists that has been published. If there probably have been other people that have examined the shroud, but if that has happened, it's not documented.
Okay, it's a lot you can do to tamper with an object in 600 years, but okay.
Yes, absolutely. So anyway, the group of scientists that were formed for the study was the Shroud of Turin Research Project.
Strup.
Yep.
Like it when your acronyms are pronounceable?
It's
okay.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then there's XKCD being deliberately antagonistic in that regard.
I got it.
No, you didn't. Just stop. Just stop. Stop.
Okay.
Anyway, I can dive into Strup's conclusions. Strup, like I said, it had a large team of scientists, 33 people on the main research team for Strup. And they also had support staff, consultants, so it wasn't just those 33, but just 33 main people. And they did post their conclusions from all the studying that they did on the shroud. And they concluded that the markings on the shroud are not painted on, and the shroud did come in contact with a human body. They say that the stains tested positive for being composed of hemoglobin and test positive for serum albumin? Albumin?
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
It's a component of blood, right?
Yep.
There it is, albumin, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
Otherwise, testing of the shroud was inconclusive. They couldn't really make heads or tails out of pretty much any other claim or information that they readily had.
The BBC documentary claimed that the blood tested as the incredibly rare blood type AB. I Googled it. 4% of the population has blood type AB. That's 1 in 20 people. It's like,
yep.
Yeah, there's millions of us. Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much their conclusions. And they specifically cite some limitations on science and the sample that they received as potential problems for getting at conclusions. And they were like, yeah, perhaps at some point in the future, further studies will be able to conclude the matter on the Shroud of Turin. After Strup had finished its analysis and published its findings, there was a follow-up to trying to analyze the shroud. I'm trying to figure out how I want to phrase all of this.
You're fine.
Yeah. So the idea behind radiocarbon dating, even when Strup was doing this, it was something that was known and it was discussed, but it was something that they couldn't really do because the radiocarbon techniques that they had access to at the time required very large swaths of the Shroud of Turin to be extracted in order to perform the test itself. Pretty much destroying the Shroud of Turin in the process.
That makes sense. You don't want to destroy something in the name of scientific inquiry when it's, unique and presumably valuable from a cultural perspective. Okay, so they waited until tech
then
got better.
Yeah, exactly. There was new tech that was developed. Accelerator mass spectrometry and gas counters were two techniques that were developed, and you can do radiocarbon dating using these techniques with a much, much smaller sample. So the Vatican was like, okay. So now that you've gone from completely destroy the Shroud of Turin to just a small piece of it, we're okay with you doing radiocarbon dating testing on this. A bunch of labs submitted to be able to be the ones to perform the radiocarbon dating, and only 3 labs were chosen. All of them were accelerator mass spectrometry labs. That was at the University of Oxford, University of Arizona, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology.
Okay, it sounds pretty good so far.
Yep. A small strip about 10 millimeters by 70 millimeters was removed from a corner of the Shroud of Turin, the same corner that a small sample was removed for the Strupp group.
So for non-metric folk, that's 2/5 of an inch by about 3 inches.
Yeah, really small samples. And that strip was then cut into 3 pieces, and a piece was given to each of the 3 laboratories.
Seems reasonable. Okay.
Yep. Each of these labs did use a control. There were other historic linens that we had already established the age of that were used as controls. And each of these labs had access to these 3 linens for comparative analysis. They came to some slightly different results. They did note that it's a little bit weird that the variation for the Shroud of Turin was a bit more than they expected. But the consensus between all 3 labs was that they have a 95% confidence level. The Shroud is dated somewhere between 1260 and 1390 AD.
So immediately before our first documentation for it.
Exactly, yes.
Huh, interesting. It's almost like someone built it to impress a girl, failed to impress a girl, threw it in his basement, pulled it out to impress a preacher, and got called on his bullshit.
Yeah, that is entirely plausible. If we're to integrate the Strupp conclusions, then yeah, they probably actually wrapped a human, but then we're like, oh yeah, that's totally Jesus. Yeah.
I'm totally imagining 2 frat bros doing this with like fake facial hair glued on them because they're too young to grow beards or whatever, and they're like poking each other with knives like, hey dude, I know I need to bleed on the thing, but come on, go easy. No, we have to make sure you look crucified, and like stabbing each other. And just some sources for this before we go too much further and dive into the next piece of controversy. Shroud.com, you've got some sources for what the Strupp conclusions. We've got some meta-analysis on the 3 radiocarbon dating techniques. We have a paper on escholarship.org. I've got rochester.edu for what albumin is, and I've got the Red Cross for blood types. And Wikipedia does have tons of sources on this, and they give ISBN numbers for a ton of things, so you can verify and vet for yourself. And there's the radiocarbon dating and the Shroud of Turin page. Check both of those out. We'll have links to them. And in this next section, we've got more Shroud.com, Encyclopedia.com, ResearchGate for some papers, and earlychurchhistory.org. You're going to have to explain that one to me.
Okay.
You're like, we can go buy a digital Omni Messiah. No, we have one at home. The digital Omni Messiah at home. I don't know.
Okay.
Mako's computer.
I wanted to try to get information on the claims, which I guess this probably should have been in with the claims. Whatever. I want to at least attempt to represent the people that are trying to say that, oh yeah, no, the Shroud of Turin is totally legitimate. Because when you understand what they're saying, you can more readily and reliably shoot it down if it's wrong. But if you don't understand it, then it's just pointless crosstalk and noise. Anyway.
I'm of the opinion that anything about the Shroud is pointless crosstalk and noise at this point. I could have been convinced, but so far everyone being pro-Shroud has been pro-ridiculousness.
Yeah.
I've seen no credibility from the Shroud crowd yet.
Yeah, there's specifically regarding the claims that it was used to wrap the body of Jesus Christ. There's pretty much nothing to prove that.
I mean, we don't even have good circumstantial evidence yet. You're going to talk about... Oh, sorry.
Kind of... Okay, some minor nuance here. Minor. Anyway, so I have a source from somebody that is saying that the Shroud is not only dated to ancient times, but is geographically linked to the area surrounding Jerusalem, which is a bold claim. So I'm like trying to dig into, okay, why do you say that? On the Strupp team, there was a consultant, Max Frey. He was a criminologist. Oh, what was his nationality? Swiss. He was a Swiss criminologist.
I think they do the second vowel pronunciation thing. That might be a Max Fry.
Could be.
Okay.
Max Fry. Maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
That's how Germans do it, and those countries are kind of close.
I'm bad at pronunciations. I make no claims otherwise.
Turns out Mako was right. Check the source. It's pronounced free. I'm bad at pronunciation too, but I'm confident.
That's not good qualities to mix. Moving on. So Max Fry, he used tape to try to extract samples of just particulates that were on the Shroud of Turin. He was given direct access to the Shroud itself.
That doesn't sound terrible so far. Okay.
He found pollen on the Shroud of Turin.
Awesome.
yeah, it's pretty good. He painstakingly tried to identify each of the bits of pollen, and there were quite a few different pollens on the shroud, like a lot of them. But there were about 5 or 6, I think, that were in particularly high concentrations. 2 of them, the only place where, this is allegedly, like for 2 of them, the only place where they overlap is in the Jerusalem area. And that is the basis for claiming that it has been geographically tied to the Jerusalem area.
Okay, superficially that makes sense, but we would want to compare that to other historical pieces of cloth and see if that hypothesis holds up. Because pollen can travel for hundreds of miles. Maybe these ancient cloths all went through Jerusalem for some reason because of ancient logistics. Reasons, right?
Something that has been brought up by other people is that maybe some of these plants could have been used by, like, as incense. And
if you sell incense 100 miles away,
these you can have things travel.
Yeah, they're far away, but they're not ridiculously far away. If you look at where Turin is on the map, if you imagine the Mediterranean, you have the boot that is Italy. Up at the top of the boot, on the left side, on the west side, that's where Turin is. And if you want to go to where Jerusalem is, you go into the Mediterranean and you go east until you can't go any further east, and it's around there. So, I mean, we're talking some miles overland, some kilometers overland, and a boat trip across the Mediterranean, right? People have been doing that for literally thousands of years. So that's not unreasonable. You could move incense from one place to the other. Okay, yeah.
There's also some speculation. I didn't really go too deep into it because none of it was substantiated from near as I could tell. But there's a bunch of speculation as to the history of the shroud itself and where it's moved throughout the world prior to 1390 AD.
Oh, so it could have been picking up pollen from all over.
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. Like I said, but that's not really substantiated, so I didn't go too deep into it. Anyway, so Fry identified these species, but when his findings were published and then peer-reviewed by other people, it was kind of dubious. Palynologists? Yeah.
Is that somebody who studies Sarah Palin professionally?
Pollen.
Okay, so we have professional pollenistas.
Yes. There's a specific kind of scientist that studies pollen and all the things surrounding pollen.
Yeah, I'm looking at that
amazing.
word. Palyn-ologists?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, great.
So these people, they cast doubt on the identifications that Fry made during his analysis. They're like, there's not enough here. You can't really say with confidence that it is this thing. And for some of them, they're like, no, it's this other thing. So his ability to identify the species for the pollen is in question from people where that's like literally their only job.
So this guy's the Zechariah Sitchin of the pollen world.
Well, maybe. Okay. Zechariah Sitchin was, near as we can tell, he was malicious and out to make money. Fry, we don't know if he was trying to make money. He could have just been normal incompetent. Okay,
that's surprisingly common as an explanation for these kinds of problems.
Yeah, so experts don't agree with Fry on these identifications. And so that kind of throws all of these interpretations into question. If we were to accept Fry's findings as fact, then he's got a good case.
It's not proof, but it's strong evidence.
Yeah.
There's reason to believe, and it would merit further study.
Absolutely, but that's not the case.
Did he have control fabrics?
No. Well, controls for the fabric and the pollen, no, he didn't have any of that. Nor did he properly use methodology to prevent contamination.
Oh, that's a killer. If you don't know that you prevented cross-contamination, then what?
Yeah.
That's terrible. So we would have to duplicate his work, go to the shroud with some more tape and verify our tape is sterile and free of pollen.
We would have to redo all the work to verify it.
Gross.
Yep.
That's terrible that he approached it this way. That's not good. Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately. So there's some problems with that interpretation and why that doesn't work. But also, later in his life, after doing his work on the Shroud of Turin, I didn't even know, I don't remember at least, that like the Hitler diaries were a thing.
What are the Hitler diaries?
I didn't go too deep into this because that seems like a whole nother rabbit hole, but allegedly there were some diaries surfaced that allegedly were written by Hitler himself.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
So Fry...
Were they like spicy? Like, do we hear about Hitler's love life?
I don't fucking know. I didn't go that far into it.
Okay, I don't know. Okay.
Presumably. I don't know.
Sure.
Maybe he had a Jewish love. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
But Fry did his own analysis on the Hitler diaries at the time and said that they were absolutely authentic. And then very shortly after, it was proven that they were fake.
So this guy's not good when it comes to methodology or just accuracy in general.
Well, we have this definitive thing, and then we have what we're looking at for the Shroud to base it off of. I'm not going to say a sample size of 2 is great, but there wasn't much that I was able to find on Fry other than these 2 examples, unfortunately.
This is pretty terrible for him.
It looks bad. It looks really bad. When actual experts disagree with your findings and you're demonstrably wrong about something else high profile, that's bad.
Okay, and this, so far we have ranging between no evidence and bad evidence. Because this is evidence of a sort. It's just not good evidence.
Yeah.
Is there any other evidence for the Shroud?
Not that I was really able to glean. Like, all of the actual... Because, like, people, again, they've been looking at photographs and trying to do photographic analysis. Photographic analysis is only going to get you so far. As far as people taking physical portions of the Shroud and doing aggressive analysis on those portions, it's only happened twice. The Strupp team and the... 3 laboratories that did radiocarbon dating.
So it's all completely a loss. The Strupp team came back and just said...
Inconclusive, aside from they're confident that the stains were not painted and that it did encase a human body.
It's probably blood. Okay.
And then the 3 laboratories doing the radiocarbon dating said with very high confidence it is from medieval times.
That's terrible.
These 2 are not mutually exclusive, as we've joked like twice now. We could have had a case where some dude just took a body, wrapped it in some linen, let it age, and put it on display in the medieval times.
I'm imagining some ancient incel on... I'm trying to imagine 4chan from the 1300s. That would be great. 4chan memes from back then.
Maybe.
He's like faking the Shroud of Jesus for the church, lol.
So if
troll
we're
the bishop.
To take all of the findings from these laboratories as fact and make the simplest possible explanation, that is the simplest possible explanation.
Yeah, we have no evidence of magic. We have nothing except possibly pollen tying it back to Israel. We don't have any claims. We don't have any explanation for how it moved, right? Nobody's saying it came by a boat or it came over land. Nobody's saying they bought it from somebody from the region. We've got nothing. It appeared one day in a place quite far, but plausibly close. It could have been moved, right?
Yeah.
It's not like this showed up in Japan or Oklahoma or something. Right? If it showed up in one of those places, it would obviously be fake.
Yeah.
But it was close enough that the story was there. It was culturally relevant, but no ties, no evidence. No documents.
Just the one bishop saying, this shit's a fake.
Now, one thing that people did try to talk a lot about was blood spatter analysis.
Mm-hmm.
I dropped all those sources because even modern blood spatter analysis ranges from a few experts get it right to this is clearly bullshit that's just used to convict black people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, modern blood spatter is not great. Even the harder modern forensic science like fingerprints and ballistic gun identification, they aren't great. Where you try to match patterns on the bullet to patterns on the inside of the gun, or you try to lift fingerprints off things.
The one time I heard a good application of blood spatter analysis was people were trying to argue like aggravated assault, like undue force, in a case where somebody had bludgeoned another person to death with a baseball bat. And they were like, yeah, we have a high degree of confidence that this person swung the baseball bat at the other person's head about 18 times. I'm like, well, how do you get that? Well, across the ceiling, we see 18 distinct streaks of blood.
Holy shit. There's blood spatter analysis, then there's counting violence. Like, holy shit.
So that's the one time I've heard blood splatter analysis being like, okay.
I'm not saying we disregard it as evidence, or we disregard everything in this vein as evidence. It's just there's a lot of people who try to do things like claim to know heights or handedness or lots of things that really are hard to get at because there's too many variables.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm sure it can be used to narrow down some things, like if you have X blood streaks, you have X events or more that caused blood streaks. That's a great use of it. Makes perfect sense. God, I'm thinking right back to Dexter, the HBO TV show. Was it HBO? About a serial killer who was a forensic blood spatter analyst, and he comes up with all these ridiculous reports like, yeah, this person was probably angry and psychologically motivated to do this because that's the only time you do an overhand swing. It's like, it's blood on a wall. You're not...
What if somebody was just taught how to swing wrong on purpose?
As a joke.
Like, how do you rule that out?
What if they're just clumsy? Yeah. What if they're injured? What if, right? What if they're wearing really big high heels? It would make them seem taller.
Okay, I guess.
I don't know.
But yeah.
Just ridiculous stuff, right? So it's like forensic science is not what it's made out to be. We trust a lot of the stuff in a courtroom a lot more than we probably should because people in a courtroom confidently say the stuff in front of a judge. And that's what sways judges, juries. I'm so sad now.
Mhm.
We could probably prove the Shroud of Turin is real in a court of law by getting enough experts to say stuff. And we could probably disprove it too.
Okay.
And this, do we need an ends on something light? Nothing here's that heavy.
Not particularly heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, it does.
I mean,
We are talking about the death of somebody?
I disagree. I don't think he was real.
Well, I'm just saying somebody. I'm not asserting Jesus. Like I said, the simplest explanation is they did put a body in the shroud. It just definitely wasn't Jesus.
I don't think you have to kill the person for that. I think you get a volunteer and you poke him a couple times, make him bleed a little bit, and then, you give him $50 and send him on his way.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm sure bodies were plentiful back then.
That's true and fucked up. Yeah, so there's scant evidence for this. And if somebody, that's a big long to read, if somebody comes along and tries to say that they have really good evidence because blood analysis, they're almost certainly full of shit.
Yeah.
I saw tons of blood analysis that was just on both sides saying it's totally real, it's totally fake.
I saw one article that was trying to be like, new scientific analysis proves the radiocarbon dating is false. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's exciting. Show me the evidence. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Okay, you got nothing.
Yeah. One thing that I saw just offhandedly in a Reddit discussion was somebody said, if the shroud were real, the images would be the same height. I'm like, wait, what? Why isn't anyone talking about this? So right before the episode, I just copied the image from Wikipedia and copied and rotated and spun it around. Because the Shroud of Turin, right, the way I described how the body would be placed in the cloth, right, there's the front and the back, and it would be wrapped around the head, right? Well, one side of the shroud is like an extra foot longer than the other side. And that's a discrepancy. That might be explainable, right?
Yeah, that seems weak, but it's something.
Yeah, because I would expect that the shroud would conform to the body better on both sides. You wouldn't get all the stretching on one side. One side's the guy's 7 feet tall, the other side he's 6 feet tall, which is still enormous given somebody back in the day.
Yeah, malnutrition was so common, people were statistically shorter.
Yeah, and also the Shroud of Turin's face. It's a white guy. It's obviously a French or Italian or European guy. That's just... It's not what you'd expect when you see someone, like we were talking about earlier in the episode. Jesus would have been Jewish or Palestinian or Arabic or not what you got with this high cheekboned white guy look. Yeah, it's just, if you look at the shroud, your first thought should be skepticism because it doesn't look like what Jesus ought to look like.
Unless you're one of those people that, as a prank, has a picture of Obi-Wan Kenobi in their living room and was told it's Jesus, and you're none the wiser.
I'll link to that. Poor grandma. Been praying to Obi-Wan Kenobi the past 15 years. Doesn't know. Okay, that's it, though. We've been blathering on with a bunch of nothing for a while now.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening. So now how we talked about the Dysevidentia laser gyroscope, $30,000.
Yeah.
We could be like the holy Dysevidentia laser gyroscope, $35,000.
$5,000 for holy?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
We can define how holy is with our own products. It's our products. That's our privilege, god damn it.
I feel like Billy Graham or the Pope will have something to say about this. Some other mega preacher, they'll want their cut, then they'll endorse it too.
We'll make our own church with blackjack and hookers.
Is that a Simpsons reference?
Futurama.
Okay.
And also a little bit of a history thing.
Thanks to all of our Patreon supporters. Our supporters at the evidence investigator level or higher include Jared, Ducktape, Keldar, Stephen Larrabee, and Kaiju Helena.
Thanks to all of our Patreon supporters. Our supporters at the evidence investigator level or higher include Jared, Ducktape, Keldar, Stephen Larrabee, and Kaiju Helena. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review, or tell a friend.
If you aren't sure where to do that, read the show notes, transcripts, and listen online at Dysevidentia.com. Support us financially at patreon.com/Dysevidentia. We have a subreddit, r/Dysevidentia. Tweet at us at Dysevidentia. Chat with us on our Discord server or watch our videos on YouTube, links in the show notes, and email us at contact@Dysevidentia.com.
Copyright 2022, BlackTopp Studios Inc. Intro music was Slow by PidX, used with permission.